He was supposed to be the fifth man to walk on the moon, but 200,000 miles from Earth, an oxygen tank exploded, and what many viewed as a routine trip to the moon turned into quite possibly the most successful failure ever experienced by NASA. At the center of this crisis was an Eagle Scout from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This week, we'll look back on astronaut Jim Lovell and how scouting helped shape him and his response to an emergency that took him from just another astronaut on a routine trip to the moon to an American hero who repeated that now famous line,
Houston, we've had a problem,
in this edition of Artifact of the Week. James Arthur Lovell Jr. was born in Cleveland, Ohio on March 25, 1928. He was the only child of James Sr., a furnace salesman, and his mother, Blanche. Lovell's father died in an automobile accident when Lovell was 5 years old. For the next 2 years, Lovell and his mother lived in Terre Haute, Indiana, with a relative before relocating to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It was in Milwaukee where Jim Lovell joined Cub Scouts. In an interview presented at the opening of the 2005 Air Camp, Lovell said,
I became a Cub Scout to begin with, and then my cousin, who was an Eagle Scout, persuaded me to join Boy Scouting, and I took his advice. The very first time I went to camp, I was just a tenderfoot. I was in his camp. He was the counselor, and I proceeded to break my arm the first day I was there, much to the consternation of my mother, and put my cousin in deep trouble for a while. But
Lovell expanded on his scouting journey in another interview, this time presented at the opening of the 2010 Air Camp.
I got my Eagle badge way back in 1943 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And at that time, I needed 21 merit badges. But we didn't have a project to get to be Eagle Scouts in those days. But we did a lot of work and community service as a matter of our scout training.
During high school, Lovell met and began dating Marilyn Lily Gerlach. Following his graduation from high school, Lovell attended college at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he studied engineering, played football, and pledged to the Alpha Phi Omega fraternity. His education at Wisconsin was paid for through his participation in the U.S. Navy's Flying Midshipman program. This program is also where he took his first steps as a naval aviator. Funding for the Flying Midshipman program was reduced, and fearing that he may not be able to continue at Wisconsin or in the aviation program, his mother encouraged him to apply to the Naval Academy. Even though he would have to essentially start over as a college student, Lovell applied to the Academy, and in July of 1948, he entered Annapolis as a plebe. During his freshman year, Lovell wrote a paper on the liquid propellant rocket engine. Following his graduation in 1952, Lovell was commissioned as an ensign in the Navy and was brought back in that summer to teach freshmen at the Academy about rockets.
my first class term paper, I wrote on the development of the liquid fuel rocket, and I was one of the first 50 because I was so much interested in going back into aviation that they selected 50 people to teach at the Academy after I graduated, teach the plebes coming in.
Marilyn was a couple of years behind him in school. While they were dating, Marilyn attended college at Wisconsin State Teachers College, and when Lovell went to the Naval Academy, she transferred to George Washington University. They were married on June 6, 1952. In October 1952, Lovell was one of 50 members of his graduating class to be selected for naval aviation training.
And I got my initial training flying airplanes with the Navy. And my mentor there was my uncle. He was an early naval aviator, number 58, and he was the one that persuaded me to go into aviation.
Lovell completed his flight training in February 1954. He tells a story about one of his aircraft carrier experiences and how his scouting training prepared him for this.
I was a Navy pilot back in the 1950s, which is a long time ago. I made a flight off the carrier at night. And several things happened. Once I lost all my instrument panel lights, and I lost the location of the aircraft carrier. I had to look around. I could have gone to Japan or tried to land there, but I didn't know exactly where there would be an airfield. So I circled around trying to find out what to do, but I kept going. I didn't give up. I didn't just bail out of the airplane hoping that someone would pick me up in the ocean. But as I was thinking of what to do, I looked down and saw a green trail made by the fluorescence of the algae. And this was done by the churning of the screw of a large ship. And so I followed that trail, and sure enough, I found my carrier back again, which saved me, a lot of trouble of either swimming or finding some spot in Japan. I think one of the things that you're going to learn in scouting is the fact that you have to accept a little bit of failures every once in a while. You might go after a merit badge. You work hard, but you didn't really learn all the things that are required to get that merit badge. And so you had to start again. I had many experiences like that as a scout, but I also had those same experiences later on in my later years.
In January 1958, Lovell entered a 6-month test pilot training program. Following graduation and certification as a test pilot, Lovell was selected as one of the 110 military pilots chosen as potential astronaut candidates for Project Mercury.
Just as I graduated from the school, which was 6 months long at that time, of course, NASA was formed, and then they were talking about putting a man in space. And they had put out, at this time, secret orders to all the people who both the Air Force and the Navy thought were qualified, and NASA has certain criteria that they went by. And it just so happened that I just finished the school, and that was one of the criteria that you had to have. And I went up for that original Mercury selection.
Lovell made it to the round of 32, selected to go to Albuquerque for interviews, and then on to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, for what turned out to be the most intense medical examination performed on any person up to that point in time. During the physical exam and testing, it was found that Lovell had a high level of bilirubin, which initially disqualified him.
I applied for the astronaut program, and I was one of the first 32 to ever apply, and I didn't make it. Those other 7 guys, Glenn, Shepard, Grissom, they all made it. I was very, very much disappointed. But then, about a couple of years later, NASA needed some more astronauts. I applied for the second time, and that time I made it. So the lesson I learned from scouting is the fact that if you don't succeed the first time, don't give up.
Not only did Lovell not give up, but he went on to participate in 4 space visits, making him the first person to fly in space 4 times. His first 2 were trips with the Gemini program, Gemini 7, where he spent 2 weeks in Earth orbit to prove that men could survive in space for the length of time it would take to travel to the moon and back. And the final Gemini launch, 12. For the Apollo program, Lovell was on Apollo 8, the first manned spacecraft to orbit the moon.
I got into the space program. And believe it or not, many, many scouts are also astronauts. And the stuff that we learn in scouting, being prepared, and learning to take care of yourself, all those factors came into being when we got into the program. The high point of my career, in reality, is my experience on Apollo 8. Apollo 8 was the first flight to the moon. We did not have a lunar module to land. Our job were as pathfinders, same as sometimes you do in scouting. We'd have to learn the navigation, the communication, to go to the moon. And more, we had to study the lunar surface to find the places, the safe places for the people who would make the first landing, the flat areas, the Mare. As we were preparing for the Apollo 8 flight, we were trying to think of something to say because we are going to orbit the moon on Christmas Eve. We realized at that time that quite a few of the world's population would be tuned into our conversation. What we finally ended up doing was reading from the Old Testament, the first 10 verses of Genesis. And so that's what we did as we orbited the moon on the 9th revolution. We read for the first 10 verses of Genesis, which was really the basis of many of the world's religions. But I have to tell you, when we reached the moon and we went around to the far side, which we don't see from the Earth, and I thought that was quite an experience, the biggest impression I got was to look at the Earth, because we saw the Earth for the first time some 240,000 miles away, just a small body, a body that if you put your thumb up to the window, you could hide the Earth behind your thumb, and you had to really think of how insignificant we really all are in the universe. A lot of things you can't practice for and something you don't know is going to happen. Always expect the unexpected was one of the things I learned early as a scout in camping and doing the merit badge studies, and then took with me into the space program.
While Lovell was a part of the first team to orbit the moon, he is best remembered for his second Apollo mission, Apollo 13.
There is a story going back to my scout training that I think is kind of important. People often ask me whether the crew panicked on Apollo 13 when the explosion occurred. Well, we could have bounced around the walls for about 10 minutes until we finally decided that we were still alive and breathing. But we didn't panic, and the reason was, at least for myself, is the fact that some of that basic scout training of being self-reliant and improving upon yourself that you could do things kept me to look positive and instead of negative of how we could get back home again. And so we took what we had to work with, and including the people at Mission Control, and we solved one crisis after another. And that was, of course, due to the fact that we are a well-trained team, that team foundation having coming from our early scout training.
Apollo 13, of course, is a perfect example. Apollos 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 were very good. They had some problems, but not much. So 13 went out expecting to have another perfect flight. 2 days out, big explosion. What happened? And that's when the attributes, those characteristics that I learned as a scout, really came into being. Because it wasn't like a previous flight where you just follow a flight plan and everything works out for it. Because we had to throw away the flight plan and we had to think out of the box. We had to think for ourselves, use our initiative, had good leadership between Mission Control and Houston and the flight crew, and had to have the teamwork going between Mission Control and the flight crew, because they had to come up with some of the answers, and we had to exercise those decisions that they made correctly so that we could get back home safely. I think one of the things that you're going to learn in scouting is the fact that you have to accept a little bit of failures every once in a while.
Following Apollo 13, his wife Marilyn said, "For 4 days, I didn't know if I was going to be a wife or a widow." She went on to forbid Lovell from ever traveling in space again. Lovell is one of only 3 men to travel to the moon twice, but unlike the other 2, he never walked on the surface. Between Gemini and Apollo, he accrued 715 hours and 5 minutes in space flights. Gerard de Groot wrote in The Dark Side of the Moon, "Of all the lunar missions, probably 99% of Americans can recall only 2, Apollo 11 and Apollo 13, the first one and the nearly disastrous third one. The others have faded into obscurity and insignificance." Following his wife's lead, Lovell retired from the Navy and the space program on March 1, 1973, and went to work at the Bay Houston Towing Company in Houston, Texas, becoming the company's CEO in 1975. Lovell moved on to the communications industry in 1977 and retired as an executive vice president of Centel on January 1, 1991. He served on the board of directors for several organizations until the early 2000s. Lovell co-wrote the book Lost Moon in 1994. A year later, Ron Howard adapted the book into the movie Apollo 13 with Tom Hanks playing Lovell. Lovell liked Hanks' portrayal of himself, but felt Kevin Costner would have been a better look-alike. Lovell makes a cameo appearance in the film, greeting Hanks on the USS Iwo Jima at the end of the film. This was his second film appearance, as back in 1976, he had another cameo in The Man Who Fell to Earth, starring David Bowie. In 1999, Lovell and his family opened a restaurant in Lake Forest, Illinois, Lovell's of Lake Forest. The restaurant displayed memorabilia from Lovell's time with NASA and the filming of Apollo 13. The restaurant closed in April 2015. Lovell was a recipient of the Distinguished Eagle Scout Award in 1976 and was recognized with the Silver Buffalo Award in 1992. In June 1964, Lovell was among the NASA astronauts who came to Philmont to study geology. In the collection of the National Scouting Museum, we have his Eagle Scout medal, which he earned in 1943. We also have his NASA training suit, boots, and gloves. These were featured in an Artifact of the Week video on July 10, 2020. It was the second Artifact of the Week video we ever did. Lovell never forgot his scouting roots. Over the years, he encouraged young scouts to pursue science, aviation, and leadership. He served as an inspiration at countless jamborees and other scouting events, always reminding scouts the skills that they learn in scouting can take them anywhere. The Lovells were married for 71 years when Marilyn Lovell died of natural causes on August 23, 2023, at the age of 93. During the Apollo 8 mission, the astronauts picked distinctive landmarks along potential landing routes for Apollo 11. Jim Lovell picked a 1,400-meter tall, triangular-shaped peak, naming it Mount Maryland. This unofficial name appears on many Apollo-era technical reports and maps, but the name was not officially recognized by the International Astronomical Union, the IAU, until July 26, 2017. James Lovell died in his home in Lake Forest, Illinois on August 7, 2025. He was 97 years old. Both Lovell and his wife are buried at the United States Naval Academy Cemetery in Annapolis, Maryland. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Join us next time as we continue to learn more about the history of Scouting America through the collection of the National Scouting Museum and Artifact of the Week.